Alright, so this video is going to be kind of a two-parter. So this is going to be all raw footage from a day on the LOCHSA that I had a person film me. Going to do kind of a day in the life video, so that's pretty cool. And then tonight I went for a bike ride and I'm just going to talk about R1 rafting. This is kind of fascinating. And then we're going to listen to that audio while this goes. Now this raw footage is longer, and so I'm just going to run the audio until the audio is done, and then we can watch the remainder of this footage. Alright, let's do it. Alright, hell yeah. So in this video we're talking about R1 boat design, what you can run R1, kind of the future of R1 boating, and kind of what that looks like from the paddler's perspective, and what boats might look like. And so this was an addendum. I'm kind of on the finish of my bike ride, and what I want to talk about is footprint of the boat. From a physics perspective, let me shift gears. From a physics perspective, if the footprint underneath the boat is, let's say, the same as a slalom kayak, because in kayaking you have a C1 division where you have very long slalom kayaks. Now I'm just going to say proportional, you know what I mean, because R1 boating, you're sitting out to the side. In this video we talk about like counterbalance, but at one position you might be able to put the boat onto edge, and if the bottom was the same shape as the Olympic, slalom kayaks, you would get the same performance out of that boat. And if you were even able to put that footprint up onto edge on both sides too, you would get the same dynamics. Now, let's say the boat's heavier. Cool. That's usually not a big deal. Aerodynamics and boat design is usually more important than just having weight in the boat, and that's evident of even the big names doing big water kayaking. Boats the same shape, whether they're on a multi-day, it might have more weight in it than if they're just running a day trip. So yeah, I just wanted to input that because this video kind of talks about what R1 boating is, what it could be, and for sure shape. An R1 boat doesn't have to be inflated either. You can have designs that are, especially when looking for modifications that work and don't work, or I don't know, just kind of experimenting. Harder hull boats will have show their attributes more than inflated hull boats. But anyway, hell yeah, I just wanted to put that addendum in, when we'll see if we come up with any more. But booyah. Alright, hell yeah. So I'm on a bike ride and I'm just going to talk about R1 rafting. And so first up is R1 raft design. I just think it'd be pretty cool. I have a lake here. That's all I have here in my hometown of Helena. I don't have any rivers, and so if I was just to paddle on a daily, it would be at a lake. So the first concept up is a playboat, an R1 playboat. And you know what I mean, C1 is a thing, and so is open canoeing. Both of those are hugely different in size. Where C1, you even have C1 playboats, and you even have OC1 playboats, but that just comes down to the technicality of wanting an open canoe from the historical perspective of open canoes, and so that made it into the freestyle nationals. But hell yeah, but you would also have just C1 boating, and for sure, one of the legends in C1 is Dane Jackson, which, that might be a piece of knowledge people don't know about. Alright, hell yeah. So, I guess when breaking down R1, I guess we need to talk about, what the hell is R1? I think for a lot of people, R1 comes from being a raft guide, and realizing that you have an immense amount of skill at a sport in one area with a single-bladed paddle. And then you might realize you're like, dang, I don't have the same skill sitting in a kayak with a double-bladed paddle. So then developed R2ing. It's like all I need is, I can do my thing on my side as long as I have someone doing their thing on their side. And now we're a well-oiled machine. And then I think it spawned from being like, well, open canoeing is still a thing, and you sit in the center of a canoe. I've been in, and then even tandem canoeing is a thing. And so tandem canoeing and R2ing, when it comes to rafting, have a lot of similarities. Both, it feels like, requires two people. So let's talk about sitting positions for both open canoe, OC1, and tandem open canoe. In tandem, the person in the back of the boat is doing, most of the guiding. It's very analogous to raft guiding, paddle raft guiding. You're in the back of the boat, you're using, and we can even just keep it real basic with the paddle strokes. You're doing a paddle and a pry. That's about it. You're paddling forward, you're prying to the side. Nothing too complicated, but that's, from that position, you can now guide a canoe down a river. And so that's how I got my start, actually in high school. So the only thing that we had was canoes. Rafts were expensive, and just very few and far between. But hell yeah, every backyard had a canoe. And so as long as parents were willing, we could take those canoes and go down some rivers. And then when you're canoeing, hell yeah, if you're in the back, you're doing most of the guiding. Now there are some strokes you can do off the front. And, after you've been in the game, I don't mind sitting in the front. I could guide the whole boat from the front. But hell yeah, so you're going to be guiding from the back. Oh, hell no. Oh no, they're on leashes. Yeah. So then my first introduction to R1, like from a true perspective, from hey, people are actually going down a full run, a full stretch, not just hopping in the boat and going, I don't know, like some sort of half portages, or just jumping in the front of a 14-foot boat and kind of just drawing it to a location to get it ready for a raft trip. So I was on the Golly River and Pillow Rock, just watching boats, and that was fascinating because you're kind of at a midpoint of a Class 5 river, and here's these R1 boaters, typically taking their 14-foot rafts from their companies down the river. And that's where I just bring up the sitting positions. That was 2013. And a lot of those boaters would sit in the very, very back of the boat, off to the side, in their tradish paddle guiding position. The rafts are so heavily laden that even though they're sitting back there, the raft hardly tips up. You got plenty of counterweight off the front. Now, if I was taking a canoe down the river, I could also sit in the back, but I might want to throw a bag of water, some sort of cooler equivalent, like cooler full of weight in the front, and then hell yeah, you can just guide the whole thing down. You can paddle it forward, you can do your turning strokes in both directions. One direction is always going to be harder than the other, and we can talk about that. Well, just in general, in a traditional 10-foot R1 raft, it's actually very difficult to paddle on one side. Your boat turns, kind of in the opposite direction, and it's actually harder to go that way because your boat's turning but not keeping momentum. And so sure, you can turn that way, but good luck getting any speed that way. Where if you turn the other way, you're more kind of drawing that way, and then the pry rotates your boat around that draw. Hell yeah. Oh, we got a hill. Let me gear down. Alright, hell yeah, we're going for a nice bike ride. And this is good to see if I can keep it conversational pace the entire way. It's always good. Where do I want to go with this? Now I'm just kind of telling you the kind of the two sitting positions. Yeah, in R1 you can sit in the back of the boat, or like a traditional solo canoe or whitewater canoe, or even you sit in the middle. And then so those are your two sitting positions. Hell yeah. I don't know why I mentioned all that. This is just kind of an overview of R1. But yeah, I definitely wanted to get back to just play boating. You know what I mean? And definitely with the freestyle boating, whether it's a kayak or a C1 or an OC1, it's been around for a while. And so yeah, and those boats are hella small. Oh yeah, it was the sitting position. You know what I mean? So what do people think is traditional R1 boating? I think it's one person in a raft. Also though, you know what I mean, more traditional, and these can change over the next decade. What you thought was traditional is now obsolete. But sitting always on an outer perimeter tube. Where even now I'm sitting more inside, and if I had a tiny boat, I could sit in the middle of it. Now, I would still choose to be elevated compared to sitting in the bottom of just an oversized inflatable kayak. And so, like, I'm gonna say that's just an old tradition of R1 boating, speaking as if the sport has decade after decade of growth, that sitting on top of the boat is what makes R1 R1. And I think there's always going to be some sort of sitting on top of the raft. That's kind of what separates rafting from inflatable kayaking. So there's a couple things that separate rafting from inflatable kayaking. There's that. And then there's a single-bladed paddle. So sitting on perimeter tubes and having a single-bladed paddle. But now people are overlapping where you can have an IK and just choose to paddle it with a single-bladed paddle. I'm actually surprised I have not taken my inflatable kayak to the lake and tried that. One is just because I don't want to sit too low and I don't want to have this huge paddle. You know what I mean? But I do have this oversized thwart off a 17-foot Riken that I wanted to strap into that inflatable kayak. I just have one of those Outlaw singles. And then just sit on that tube and just see, you know what I mean, if sitting way up high in an inflatable kayak is just going to be way too tippy. So that brings up kind of the third thing that separates R1 rafting from other things is counter, what do you call it? I was just going to say like counter leverage, counterbalance. So when you're sitting on one side on one tube, I mean, you might just tip the boat over. If the boat's small enough, sitting on the outside tube of a boat could just make it tip over. You got to gear up. If you had an inflatable kayak and you try to sit on the side of it, hell yeah, you're just going to tip over. And so the counterbalancing in R1 has always came from the fact that R1 boats were always oversized. You know what I mean? 10 foot. The Mini-Me was kind of the first tiny boat. And even that is hard to come by, and not too many people have them. So people are in the range of a 10 foot to at least a 9.5. I think the first one on the market was like the Tributary 9.5. And so yeah, between 9 and 10 feet. And most of those boats still had some heft to them. The only one that was super light was the Mini-Me. That's the only one that's around 50 pounds, 55 pounds. All the other boats are kind of up there. You know, you're 60, 70 pounds. I gotta gear down. Alright, but hell yeah. But you just have a physical property of counterweight. You know what I mean? You could have an inflatable kayak sit on the side of an inflatable kayak and still provide enough counter leverage. Even if it was just a little, from a physics perspective, I'm just imagining a very lightweight frame sticking out the other side a few feet with some bags of water. You know what I mean? And you could easily sit on one side of that kayak. The only issue is the second you actually shift your weight, you know what I mean, it's going to roll the other way. So R1 design has this kind of feature built in where if you sit out on a perimeter tube, your boat's counterweighted. If you sit in the middle, it's balanced. If you sit on the other tube, it's equally counterweighted. So we have, you know what I mean, some sort of equal, you know, you can jump around from left to right at least. So that's the first thought that brought into my head of like, I mean, this is taking it to the extreme. Let me gear down. Alright, no, we're geared down. This sucks, man. I'm gonna have to we're gonna have to do this climb without talking too much, but we got a car going by. Alright, hell yeah. So, I guess I should say, I was looking, the company is True Kit. They make stowaway boats for yachts. So True Kit is a PVC inflatable boat maker that makes dinghies, and they made the stowaway. It was a 7-foot raft. They just sold out of them. They're $1,200. You know what I mean? Probably $13.50 after shipping. Like, not horribly expensive, but a lot of money just to experiment. But it does have a bit of rocker. The floor is an I-beam drop stitch floor dropped into a bucket boat. So if it fills up with water, you got to tip it over. That's not a big deal. I mean, you can just tip the boat over, ride it, and then climb back in. You're good to go. But I'm glad they sold out of that because, I don't know, I was just, well, I don't know, kind of disappointed too, because I think that would be just the ultimate craft to paddle around a lake. If I'm just wanting to go R1 boating around a lake and make it hella fun and work on some paddle skills, the one thing about R1 boating, it's too heavy. Now when you're going through water, you can have that water provide the speed for you. And even that though, you know what I mean? I don't think it's, well, there's two schools of thought here. The lighter the boat, hell yeah. For most rivers, if you have an empty boat, that's going to be the most enjoyable at least. Now is it the most stable? Maybe not. Lightweight boat gets kind of tossed around. The heavier the boat, you actually dig into the current. That's what I used on the Grand Canyon. It was like 200 pounds of gear, maybe plus. And I'm just going with the flow. But still, if you need to make moves, you are weightlifting. Every paddle stroke is hell. Alright, I gotta do two hands now on the bike. We're going, climbing a mountain. This is the beginning of the climb. So hopefully it's not too jittery. Hell yeah. So yeah, so there was just this idea that an R1 boat can be a small, you know, and sky's the limit when shrinking an R1 boat down. Like an IK, for all those reasons, won't work. You need some sort of counterbalance. Hell yeah. And then kind of the first thing, if we're actually talking a playboat, the most unique thing about a playboat is the short end. You know, two short ends, but definitely the front bow is short and has a very sharp lip near the water's surface that can dig into the water, easily plow, and with some speed, you can use that to grip and start to rotate your center, the boat center and your center of gravity. You know, I mean, start to do a loop. Now in R1, I don't know, that's what I was thinking, is like, you ain't doing a loop, but you could at least pirouette up to vertical. And if you can go up to vertical, you can always pull a half twist. You know what I mean? So even in a, I mean, there's some real simple things you could probably do in a playboat. I'm not a kayaker, but you could easily go bow stall, you know, bow stall the cartwheel, and if you want to overshoot that, just go bow stall, overshoot a cartwheel to just landing back. You know, it's kind of a quick 180. And so all those things would be identical in an R1 boat. And I'm just going to say they are, because the only difference is you're sitting up a few more inches. And even a traditional C1 boater, C1 playboater, is going to be kneeling anyway. So they're already going to be up, you know, even if it's half the distance of a normal R1 boater, you can always, at that point, you're splitting hairs about sitting position and balance. And so, sure, a small R1 boat, you might be sitting more centered, you might be a little bit lower, but you might also have the opportunity, for sure, because you're not attached in an R1 boat, you can have, especially towards the back of the boat. So that's where, if we're also just talking about R1 boat design, the compartments are completely unnecessary. If someone, I mean, it's just like a kayak. A kayak needs, on a day trip, enough compartment, and we're just talking extra storage space for literally like a throw bag, maybe a tiny first aid kit. And they have plenty of places to put that stuff, either between legs or behind seats. Where the same is true for an R1 boat, is technically you don't need any, you know, just like the alpaca rafts, the alpaca pack rafts, they don't technically have to have any storage capacity either. Now I'm just talking physics and inflatables. And then also knowing, we all know what kayaking is, and inflatable kayaking. But I still think we don't fully understand what R1 boating is or could be, just based on not experimenting enough with it. And boats are expensive to make. So any of these experiments could be, one, not worth it, too expensive, and then you just kind of have prototypes. And so it's just like, I ain't, you know, a lot of it is like, I don't have, kind of dealing with, you know, body pain the last 4 years, back pain, knee pain, hip pain, tons of pain last 4 years. I'm just happy to be doing anything, biking, and then a little bit of rafting. Those are two sports that really help out the pain, just from the endorphin rush alone. Just because I've already have that imprinted, that these are things that I want to do and need to do. You know, I mean, you almost trick yourself, I think, psychologically. Like, your body's like, oh yeah, we do this for survival. I don't know. But I'm just glad I don't have pain doing those two sports, mountain biking and rafting. Alright, hell yeah. So, yeah, that's it. You know what I mean? We could talk more, but just an R1 playboat. But it does bring up the concept also about R1 boating. Is, on the LOCHSA I ran into, he was a surfer, a river surfer, and he didn't have his surfboard. He was just swimming the entire LOCHSA, no life jacket, and just a wetsuit. And so I chatted with him, definitely talked about underwater currents, stuff like that. But we talked about, and I kind of brought this up, and he joined the conversation by talking about dense. He has this theory. It's called dense boat theory, and so that's going to be the topic. Hell yeah, we'll get a rest in a second. But yeah. So on the Grand Canyon, I had 200 pounds of gear because I was solo. All the other footage of people R1ing the Grand Canyon flipped more. And I'm not patting myself on the back at all. I'm just sharing that, like, there is some benefit to loading up a boat with weight. And even on the kayakers on the Stikine, some can do it in a day. Most have to camp. And just that aspect of loading your boat up. It's bizarre at first, but even like a river like the Stikine, there can be massive advantages to have a heavier boat, a denser boat. It means that you're going to go through waves and not get instantly surfed by them, which is hugely dangerous on the Stikine. You have massive river or corner pocket holes that will not let you go if you have a low density boat. And then so and that's kind of the litmus test I think of when R1 rafting, is like the Stikine will be R1. I mean, I'm older and don't have I mean, I have a desire, but I don't even have the desire to, you know, want to take too many risks to even start running harder class 4s and class 5s. But I also want to develop the skills to do that at the same time, you know, so it's kind of a weird thing that I have going on. That also brings up the other idea, is like Dane Jackson and most kayakers got good because of competitions. The two competitions you do as a kayaker is slalom, which teaches you how to dive in and dive out of really tiny, powerful holes and eddies. You know, so your boat angle and paddling skills are hella dialed. And even though it's not the most, you know, crazy whitewater, still it's going to be the most extreme angles and balance positions when doing slalom. And then for sure the obvious is just freestyle. And so like someone, an athlete like Dane, you know what I mean, just at a very young age, able to take any sort of wave and be comfortable, and just even just proprioception, just knowing exact locations of where you are on those waves. And then I'm just going to throw in, I think there is something just a little bit harder, because here's something that I've never seen Dane Jackson do, so here it is. So at one of the competitions, the World Freestyles, if that's what it was, someone had a big open canoe, and it's just the wrong tool, where other people were in the model is the black fly. I think E-Squiff makes it. I don't know how to say that word, but so even with an open canoe, we got a huge hill. You have tiny play boats. Hell yeah. Crux. There you go. Alright, hell yeah. And we're going this way. So, yeah, even in this is the OC1 division, open canoe, but they were still making their boats dynamically as small as a traditional kayak playboat. It just had to take in a certain amount of water and get heavy as hell. And then there was someone trying with your standard whitewater canoe, that doesn't have low volume ends. So that's kind of from the dense boat theory part of it. But just really long water lines. And when you're trying to stick a long boat into holes, it's very difficult. Now, I will say I'm very impressed, you know, when pulling up, especially like, oh, what's his name? Wade? Is it Dave? Damn it. Forget his first name. Yeah, my name's David. Maybe I'm confusing that. But yeah, Wade, for sure. I think he's an Eastern boater. Seems to paddle out east. But he's one of my favorite pros. Probably, just the pros that I know and really enjoy watching. One is Dane Jackson, because I really do like freestyle moves, or just that aspect of boating. And that's typically what I'll. But then also linking the freestyle with running, you know, using those freestyle skills in big water environments. Oh no, it's just Wade Harris. Sorry, it's like. Yeah, is it Wade Harris? Is it Wade Harrison? Oh man, sorry I'm botching this, but you know what I mean. When you watch people on YouTube and mainly, it's like you have a general gist of the legends that you're watching, but yeah, you can easily forget their name. You know what I mean? But yeah, Wade Harris. I think Wade Harrison. I'm just gonna say that. And hell no, has no connection to my name at all. I think that's just the what do you call that? Narcissism in me. I was just, is your name Dave? Oh no, that's my name. Anyway, so hell yeah. And so he has some really good footage of, you know, just surfing really difficult waves that are really short in longer kayaks. I mean, both Dane and him will run kind of high volume kayaks and still be able to surf real tight holes. Anyway, so at this competition, this OC1 big long canoe couldn't do anything. And so there's an element where it's just like, never seen Dane in one of those huge long canoes that just seems, you know what I mean? So there is using the right tool for the job, and that's where R1 can be viewed as the wrong tool, you know what I mean? But it's hella fun for a lot of things, and all the R1 athletes out there have carved a path that is getting more substantial. You know what I mean? It's been slow rolling from decade after decade after decade, but I think we're at a tipping point. You know what I mean? I'm still going to make the joke that there's 5 of us, just because you know what I mean? Sometimes I don't look at all the platforms, and most of these athletes do not post, and I'm more just a YouTube viewer. But hell yeah. And starting to run hella spicy runs. And with that, at least you get to see like what's happening dynamically to the raft. And but that's a challenge for the next generation of athletes that really want to take on R1. Is you know what I mean? It'd just be fascinating to find the Dane Jackson that wants to boat every day. Like it's. Even me, it's just, I want to do other things a lot, and I'm a weekend boater and sometimes forget to boat on the weekend. And that's crazy from an athletic perspective. If you love the sport so much, you would just do it every day for the rest of your life, and those skills would build. So hell yeah. And then that's where I really enjoy R1 surf, because you have a harder boat that, you know, is less forgiving. The only time, like, there is places where R1 boats are hella forgiving, and that's getting like surfed in a hole. You ain't getting out, and so at least if your objective is to not get kicked out of the hole, there's plenty of perfectly shaped holes that you ain't coming out of. And then for some of those, it's just like, well, how do you get your R1 boat out? And hell yeah, and that is, it's harder. I'm gonna bring, you know, that's why I brought up the kind of the analogy of that longer OC1 in a freestyle competition. And on that wave, just couldn't keep the wave. You know what I mean? But that same boat could be stuck side surfing a sticky hole that the kayakers would be able to work their way out of, and so that's going to happen at big water levels. Is you're going to have a hole that's going to retain you, and you're going to have to work to get out. And so that's kind of like the check box that hasn't been established yet in the R1 community, is, you know, because it requires a level of surfing. You have to surf your R1 boat out just like a kayaker would surf for the exits of a hole, using the dynamics to actually provide that motion and movement. Hell yeah. And so and so that brings up back to just small boats, because I've been at my local wave, it's getting so small, but I'm still able to learn a lot and do some spins and do some moves. Now, if I had a smaller boat, it would probably be even more enjoyable, and I would probably learn more about the dynamics. There was one aspect of even my boat that has kind of rocker underneath. It has rocker tip to tail, but it also even almost has rocker underneath the boat side to side. And I have found that in certain cases, I want to edge the boat when I lean on the tube, and it doesn't edge enough, where like the upstream side, the tube that I'm not leaning against is catching water and gonna flip, especially in a hole. Where a kayak, hell yeah, you're leaning your boat onto edge, and you can for sure make sure the other part of your boat doesn't purl and catch. Where R1, the boats aren't designed that way. And it's not that you would want them to be, because if you did get out onto an edge and you were already, you know, perpendicular, you would just tip over. So it does make a boat more tippy, but it gives you more control in those dynamic places. And I mean, that's what kayaking is. It's just, you're always using that extreme. If I can't use that extreme of getting my boat to be perpendicular and lean my whole body into a wave, and have it get I can't even get my boat, you know, to free up on the other side. But if I was able to, there'd be a real tendency for it just to flip over on top of me. Or in a kayak, you're braced in, you're sitting in it, and then you can have the roll. So there is limitations with R1 boating where, you know, I mean, that's one of the big limitations. If you make a tippier boat, you're going to be upside down more. And currently, the name of the game is stability to run makey runs. You know what I mean? If you're running, you know, kind of runs that you would not want to swim down, then more stability currently is better than being able to edge an R1 boat and try and, you know, using that edging for your benefit. Because that brings up that topic of dense boat theory. You still have so much lightweight boat just sticking out there that the second something touches, it's gripping, and if it's on the wrong lean, you're tipping over. And so that's where currently R1 boating is pretty unique, because you can have a boat that's stable and you can flip less than a kayaker for the same runs. You know what I mean? You can have a kayaker do the upper gully, and I would just consider that just to be kind of an easy kind of class 4+ run. From just the standpoint that you can clean it, you should be able to do the upper gully every time with real clean lines from a class 5 perspective. If you're a class 5 high water boater, like the gully is just a playground where there'd be no need to tip over. But think about it, even in a kayaker like Dane Jackson going down trying to do different moves, he might dip his head past vertical where he's going to brace himself upright, and at that point an R1 boater is already upside down. So an R1 boat does not have the opportunity to brace, and maybe it should. You know what I mean? Maybe you have an R1 boat that's light enough, small enough, you know, perfectly dense enough, if that's what you're needing, to still be able to, and not connected, you know what I mean? Make sure you're free, because I think that's the freedom of R1 boating. I'm sitting in this thing and I can sit anywhere and move anywhere. Besides just a wedge of a foot, I'm not connected. I got to gear down again. Whoop. If I'm able to. Nope. This is it. All right, we got the spicy part of the climb. Oh man, my shoes are squeaking in it. It meant like that's part of the like having bipolar. I always think I really don't have hallucinations, but you know, just the hearing things that aren't there. I'm always having to, if I hear something that's weird or out of sorts, I have to listen for it twice just to make sure it's, you know what I mean. If I can identify it twice, if it's just a one-time noise, I have to forget about it, because you'll lose your mind on one-time noises. All right. I mean, if something's gonna eat you, please make a noise twice so I can run away. All right, hell yeah. So yeah, so that's the wild thing about R1 boating. And honestly, I don't know what's the best. Like currently, for sure, more stable. I'm just thinking, I'm not gonna do any name dropping, but the RMR Storm is a pretty large boat. It's like 10.5 even. And I would say it seems substantial for a 10-foot boat, even compared to kind of the Mini-Max. Mini-Max seems long, but not particularly wide. Where the Storm just seems all in all like a more balanced, wider boat. And for running trashy runs that, you know what I mean, where it's just a crapshoot. And so let's bring up the idea of a 50-50 wave. That's where I really enjoy the LOCHSA, because the LOCHSA wave, especially, we'll just bring up the idea of if you're trying new things, that thing might be a 50-50 wave. Now, there's usually always a very greasy line down the left, but people don't know that. And still, for the average boater, it becomes a 50-50 wave. Now, it's a very low consequence afterwards, hopefully. Just high, powerful water, but like zero chance of getting hit by rocks. And so, if you had a wave after wave of that on a river, I mean, that's technically what big water class 5 is. Like and where that wave isn't even as big as the big waves in big water class 5. You know, so I'm thinking rivers like the Tumwater at substantial flows, and the Stikine at any flow. You know, I mean, just rivers that are just on the verge of being possible, from getting even a kayak through upright. And so getting a raft through upright brings up the idea that you're not going to. You know, so there's a certain caliber of river where your raft is not going to go through the wave upright, and then the question is, now what? And so, you know, last week, and I want to be more public about this because it worked so crispy, is, so let's just, you know, do the forward, get it out. Doing a chest harness. So I think you want a chest harness so you have a lot of contact. Oh, huge hill. Another crux. And then and you want that connection point to be top of the PFD or excuse me, or just center of chest, kind of protruding somewhere around the midpoint of the PFD. And then the anchor line, I was having really good luck having it in front and attached to the bottom of the raft Well, actually, no, I'm going to scratch that. I would say top of the front thwart. Because then when you tip out, and then I might have lost a lot of people just from the crazy factor, but no, it's not. But I would only couple this system with an emergency air supply that I've also had in the past. Mine broke, so it's no longer just the valves deteriorated. It no longer holds PSI. But yeah, just any, because with entrapment, you need more than, 3 seconds of holding your breath if something funky happens. But even with serious entrapment, if you have an air supply that can give you, like, even those spare airs with the smallest container, you get 15 breaths. Now, if you're panic breathing, that's going to be 10 seconds of air, but that still could be like the best 10 seconds of air of your life to get yourself the hell out of a situation. But anyway, but for the most part, having a very short leash that when you tip outside the boat, like you're not even low in the water. And that was where the genius aspect of this came in, is because you can already be slightly elevated. And so when you tip out, climbing back in can be made simple, like way easier. Like you're already at the level of your tube. And so that's pretty sweet. And if the leash or tether is attached to the midpoint of the front thwart, you can still do a hand over hand on that rope. And yeah, so that was the huge thing, is just like, man, when you fall out, you're really high out of the water, and you're in just a prime place to speedily pull yourself back in. And then I won't get into it, but all of this, you can have hella redundant quick releases. I made my first prototype just with a bunch of very short NRS straps. Now, you don't want loose, you almost want more like hose rubber for your connection point, so it doesn't wrap around yourself or really anything. It's more of like an outrigger at the end of the day, but still hella quick release attachment points. Even if inch by inch, you can just, but yeah, it's really fascinating. And then the leash also worked out where if the farthest away from your boat you could get was from like full extension with your arms. And that's the limiting part about that. You don't want it too close, because you actually can't extend the boat out away from you to pull yourself back in normal. If the boat is upside down, you're still actually even more primo to pull it over. You have to use the technique of flipping the boat up over your head instead of flipping it and then pushing it away. But in a class 5 scenario, you don't want to use that technique anyway. You don't want to be upside down, flip the boat over, and then in the flipping process have to let go of it and push it, so the other half lands near you. Yeah, that's more of a class 3 move. That gets dicey in bigger water. You might not want to reflip and just hang on tight. Oh, hell yeah, this is where the climb gets real. This is where I get pumped too. Damn. Hell yeah. So, and that's going to be, from my perspective, absolutely the only way I would train up for a run like the Stikine. Because in the training for a run like the Stikine, I would want 0 swims. Because like kayakers have shown that you can handle 1 or 2 swims on the Stikine. But man, All those swims, even in a kayak, are when you got yourself into a hole that isn't retentive. You're already at the lowest portion of that hole, and an exit is freeing you out the bottom of that hole. Or an R1 boat, the crashes can just be so much more violent, where you might even just going up and falling at a huge elevation into said hole can make you go way deeper and just crush rocks, where very easily you're going to get injured even if you do pop up for air. Because a kayak, you're already in your boat and your head is your only exposure, and you have a lifetime of protecting that head from leaning in, down to almost like 6 inches. Kayaking is for sure superior in that regard. That's the biggest danger of R1 boating, is just dynamic crashes, especially in a Class 5 environment that can so easily separate you, where just one tipping over equals a separation. And so you just can't have that for some of these large runs. Now, it's not that the first R1er won't be able to do it without attaching themselves. I'm just saying what I would feel sane about, and that's the only way I could want to progress up against big waves, to figure out the dynamics. You know what I mean? In case in point would be get on the LOCHSA when it's running above 20. We're kind of having global warming, it doesn't do that very much. But everything is going to be flushy enough where connecting yourself to a rope, isn't the biggest deal. And if the boat actually does get surfed, from that dense boating perspective, an R1 boat is the absolute worst thing to get surfed in a keeper hole. It will not come out. But if you are attached, you're providing a little bit of weight, and if you're attached so close that you can reach that boat, now you've set your boat you've just made your boat hella dense. So from that dense boating perspective, that happens. Because I've even run water bags in my front compartment on leashes, just not long leashes, but when they fall out of the boat, if the boat's upside down, they're going to get low in the water and they're going to drag that boat through any feature. And I felt that in a few times where I flipped in a hole, was able to hold on, and the boat was able to exit. Because even if you are able to hold on in a hole, two things happened. One, my fingers, it's too much. It's at the limit of joint pressure for one hand, which I do not recommend people getting that injury of trying to hang on to their R1 boat while you tip over in a sticky hole and you're getting flushed and the boat's in there. It might be too hard to grab and hold on to. All right, last hill, then we'll cap this video. And so the harness does two things. One, I don't have to take that brutal impact with my hands, and even on the golly, I fell out, which was a move. The golly was a legit sideways move into inertia. I didn't stay low enough in the boat, so I just went over the handlebars. That's going to be a very common thing in R1 boating. I hung on with one hand. That actually wasn't where I got injured. But then the boat freed, and I didn't ditch my paddle, and I go up against the stopper wave, right before house. That kind of protects everything. And the boat stalls on that, and that pulled my finger muscles. And so that's where I got injured down there. And it kind of sucks. I really don't talk about that, but I had to kind of pull the plug from that moment. You know what I mean? That was kind of hopefully an omen, you know, to do better things with the sport and progress at a slower pace. But hell yeah. Yeah, it's not worth it. And so that's where I have this technique of might as well ditch your paddle and grab with two hands. If I was on that pillow rock and I fell out at inertia, if I instantly grabbed on with two hands, I could have pulled myself back in and we would have been money. But yeah, one-handed, it's a superhero move that's going to cost you your tendons. And that injury really doesn't go away. So that's, yeah, kind of a bummer. Hell yeah. So the benefits of being anchored to the boat. And then, so I really want to make a footage of little things I see on the Stikine. Alec Fletcher, a Bozeman kayaker, it's really young, super successful, you know what I mean? Running things probably earlier than anyone yet. I don't know if he's freestyle bound, but definitely put in his dues from a very young kid, as his YouTube shows. You know, kind of a little prodigy, similar to Dane. Yeah, he has one move where he's going into a feature that's so downwelling, even in his kayak, he gets lighted out for days. And if you weren't in a kayak, you would just hit the bottom of the river and be so suspect to rocks and whatever other underwater garbage you'd be up against. And that's the major danger of the Stikine. It might seem like a high volume river, but it's high volume rocks. And so if you're going underneath the surface, you could get subbed in some very heinous places. So that would be the classic case where if in that position you were strapped to an R1 boat, you would not go deep as hell. And you would even have the benefit of your boat staying on the surface. And then, so we can be done with that. But it is, the things that'll get you in an R1 boat is there's so many holes that you can't get out of in an R1 boat on the Stikine, where dense boat theory is going to be needed, I think. So very strategically making a boat as dense as you need it to be to still be able to move laterally and do the lines you need to do. And sometimes that even helps out better. Like the heavier your boat is, the more that you can use the river to your especially in big water. Big water is always pushing you away, you know, because it's a 3D landscape. And so if you're trying to be centered or move from left to right, everything is pushing you probably in the direction you don't want to go. So dense boat theory allows you to kind of carve through, you know what I mean, those features. So hell yeah. And that's the thing. I don't know if I even want to do any, you know, let's say I just chose to never do a class 4 river even. You know what I mean? Not even class 5, which I don't do. Doesn't mean I can't be a coach and do a lot of the stuff from the armchair, because I don't know, I get a lot of my I run some serious rivers in my dreams where even those, I don't know if I've talked about this, but I would rather just run those. I'd be so satisfied of just, you know, running river trips in my dreams, and they're very piecey, you know what I mean? They're very, very just, here's a little stretch, one rapid at a time here and there. But yeah, the dynamics are different for sure. The size and scale is different. And but yeah, that's the deal about reality. Reality is hella real, and it's physics and circus trickery to pull off, you know what I mean, things on a consistent basis. So that's what I kind of want to explore. Is and that's what you should do too. You should always be looking at 2 levels up. If you're a class 3 boater, if you're looking at class 5, it's not going to make any sense. You know what I mean? You're just going to be like, oh, that looks cool, I want to do it. Well, no you don't. If that's your attitude when you look at some footage that's 2 levels up, if you can't see that you don't want to do it, then you're not seeing it. You know what I mean? And so that's where the education that you can always do for yourself. I need to turn my bike light off so we save the juice, because we're on top. We did our mountain bike. We're going to end this video. But now we can wrap it up. I'm going to go do a little downhill. Yeah, so, yeah, because even before the Grand Canyon, I looked at, you know what I mean, some legends, some have fallen, of the Wenatchee and running Tumwater Canyon. And just seeing, like, oh, I see what you're doing. You know, even at a class 5 and at the highest level, it's still physics. Now, there can be a lot more freedom when it comes to kayaking, but still. And there's some times where people, like, even aren't aware of what they're doing. That can happen too. But you can always look at someone and see the dynamics that's at play. And like a coach can see those things. And you can even be even at a slightly higher awareness of the physics that are going on. Even if those athletes, from an intuitive perspective, have already ingrained those into themselves. And they're like, what are you talking about? Oh, okay. Is that what I'm doing? Because I just know what the fuck I'm doing. And so that's kind of cool to analyze. Because, yeah, I analyzed, you know, footage of at least how you would run the Tumwater into waves. And for whatever reason, I just lucked out on the Grand Canyon, and I used some of those duck dive motions, you know what I mean, that I imprinted into my head. And I used them for the first time because, well, no. We went to the Wenatchee and we tried to duck dive some waves, you know what I mean, and try to get into that mode. But not really, you know what I mean. So there is this potential to imprint new knowledge for the first time when tackling very new things. To be like, I'm going to use this technique for the very first time, and it's going to work because I've analyzed the physics. And that's wild, because some of these runs you don't get a second chance, and they are stout enough where it's just like, nope, that line requires a very specific move. Like the Dane Jackson, just like last week, there's 3 big waves in the Stikine. I don't know the rapids, I just know visually some of them. Where the first one, to the class 3 boater, you're just like, oh, why don't you just go down the center? Well, the first one is a river-wide wave that's so tall, and a wave is just a wall of water. Even though it has current moving up over it, if you're at the bottom stationary, it might not be able to carry you up like a conveyor belt. And on that one's the case. And river right, it's blocked by a huge-ass, you know, sieved rock. And if you got surfed into that, holy hell, you ain't even going through it with dense boat theory. You know what I mean? So the line is to the left, and you're running a very specific seam, and you're cresting the seam. And even that, I'll make a video on that, because even when you're doing that, you're cresting that seam, and because we talked about rivers, how they're 3D, you know what I mean, like a pyramid, you're cresting that seam on the left, and if you are getting pushed, you're going to get pushed laterally into that right wall, where even Dane dips the left tube to go more dense. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the dense boat theory, is like you want the opposite of getting surfed. If you F that line up and even just get surfed on that, yeah, you could go laterally to the right, because that's where that lateral wants to push you, but you might not crest over, and you might get dropped back in. And so that's a very specific move, but an R1 boat could do that, you know what I mean? So that's just fascinating. So it's like you might as well analyze that move, even though the scale and just the rivers you would have to run and get skill on before tackling something like that, and almost just, and it's not even the rivers, it's like the lifetime of skill you would need to tackle. You know, unless it can be done as a circus trick. That's what I was saying, is like, I heard through the grapevine our tours want to do it and be the first to do it. And hell yeah, you could probably do it. Just look at the creature craft footage. I mean, you do it in a big enough boat, and I'm thinking R1 from a 10-foot boat, you know what I mean? The classic boat. Not like an R2 in a 14-foot boat, but R2 in a 14-foot boat. It's you're either upright or you're effed. You know, it's like, that's kind of the weirdness about that. But if it can be done as a circus trick, the thing that I think about is, you know what I mean, from an R1 perspective, it should be able to done. You should be able to do laps on it. You know what I mean? If you're running the Stikine and you're not lap oriented, then it's a circus trick. You know what I mean? I shouldn't say that, because I shouldn't diminish accomplishments. But yeah, that would be just legend status. Because especially with footage, it would open the doors to see what aspects go and where the trickiness is in an R1 boat. But then there is the, hell yeah, get your skills hella dialed to where that can be done lap-wise. But yeah, and you don't have to drive halfway across the planet just to do something at the equivalent. Time Water in Washington has that on the daily. And then can even have low flow. You can do that from low flow to high flow, and every flow can be, up the game and get your skills going. Anyway, so I'm going to be done with this. I just want to make sure I have light for the downhill. So this was talking about R1 boat design, R1 potential, smaller boats versus bigger boats, how to prevent swims. Swims are going to be the most risky thing in high water R1 boating. Getting boat separation is the biggest thing. And the fact that light boats do not climb out of holes, they stick in holes. You can get massive boat separation from that perspective. If you swim at a kayak, cool, you're going to be in the same location as your kayak, where rafting, that raft just sticks. Alright, so we're going to be done with this. Thanks for joining me, and hell yeah. think the biggest risk of death is getting your head hit by underwater rocks, you know what I mean? So if you went into that and got thrown into that you know what I mean, kind of head first, and then slammed up against the rock, there's so much speed through there that you can knock yourself out. And so getting knocked out is probably the most likely cause of death, you know, in huge features like that. Just in an R1. In a kayak, you're at least locked in. You flip upside down, you can at least lean forward. That's still a huge risk with kayaks. But rafting, you know what I mean, you have so much leverage throwing you into those features. So just knowing that you can actually brace up against the surf, I went back in, knowing that I tried to high side, couldn't do it, flip. Just know that you might be on the exit even when you flip, so if you hold on to your boat, I don't know, I think it's better because your boat is buoyant, so it keeps you on the surface, and that prevents you from getting like real deep. But if it's a retentive hole, you're just gonna soak in there. So that one, I felt like I got surged once, you know what I mean, where it's like if you get surged twice, you gotta be thinking about exiting and having enough breath to get underneath that. And that's really where I wish my air tank didn't break. You know what I mean? I might hit my chin or I might break my chin on that slip. But I definitely want to get a new air tank. Oh, you know what? So much speed. It's crazy, it works so well. will just throw you sideways and slow your momentum. You're just always surfing.
Up on that stroke and do that, because what it does, I don't know, I think maybe it turns your boat, but I think you can just get more drive. I don't know the physics behind it, but grabbing concrete for an R1, I would give up on that, do this, and then, you know, go to the other side. All right, hell yeah, we did it. LOCHSA. Do a full pan. For sure. Come out here and, you know, it makes sky's the limit. You can go as big as you want. That's for sure.